Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new extra special episode. This is a Teach, Sleep, Repeat bite-sized episode. Hayden, how we doing?
I'm very well. I'm quite excited to be starting a new little series here.
I know we're back in opposite ends of the world, i.e., 2 roads away because we live very close to each other.
Yeah.
Recording remotely, and we're going to start off our little bite-sized episodes. They're going to be shorter because I know we end up getting longer and longer with the long-form stuff. So we're going to experiment with a nice little short episode every now and then. We're going to call it bite-sized, like we mentioned, and we're starting off, Hayden, with a Q&A special. So,
Good.
Can I kick things off?
Yeah, please do. Let's get into it.
Because to start off, we've actually written our own questions to start with, and at the end, we've got some questions from you guys that you wrote into us. So there is, believe it or not, some stuff I don't know about Hayden yet. So I've written 2 questions. Hayden's written 2, and we're just going to get going and get to know each other a bit better, Hayden.
I'm not sure that's true, Dylan, considering how much I share with you about my life.
I know. I was really struggling to think of 2 questions, but I do have one.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Okay, go on then. You start.
So in terms of your enjoyment and in terms of your ability, so I want 2 answers here.
Mm-hmm.
What is your favourite subject to teach apart from maths? Because I know maths, you probably think you're the best at teaching maths in terms of your best subject and it's your favourite.
Oh.
So I want to know, what are you best at teaching? But also, what do you enjoy most? Because they might not be the same thing.
Yeah, they're not the same thing. So the first thing that came to my head, and I'm going to go with my gut here because it's a hard question. History, I think I enjoy the most.
Really?
Yeah, I enjoy teaching history the most other than maths. And I think it's purely, I think it's because it's the most interesting to me and usually to the kids as well. If you get the right topic, right, you know, it's like World War II, classic year 6 topic. It's the kids love it every year. They absolutely love it. And I just get a lot of enjoyment out of that because you can, I don't know, history, it's just interesting, isn't it? A lot of people like history.
Well, I've got a history degree, so I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very interesting topic. So that's the one I enjoy the most. And what was the other one? Which one I feel?
What do you feel like you're best at? Because, for example, I love teaching history, but I would argue that there are a lot of much better primary history teachers than me, and I wouldn't.
Yeah, me too. Which is why I'm not picking that as the same one because I don't think I'm. I mean, you know what my brain is like. I forget everything, so I'm not very knowledgeable. I have to look up a lot of stuff before. Oh, what am I best at? I don't know. Obviously, maths is my strength. I'm not going to say English because I still think there's loads of improvement there.
Do you think the sheer amount that you teach English, because I feel like this, the sheer amount I teach English means that just over the years, that's the thing I've refined the most. And I would probably say English for that reason.
Yeah, probably. But I'm trying to be think outside the box here. I reckon science.
Oh,
I've always liked science. And I find that with primary school level science, like obviously I've remembered all that sort of stuff and it really interests me. So I quite often go off on a tangent in the lessons and like we go deeper into a particular objective where I personally find it really interesting and they ask questions. And I often find that I know the answers in science, whereas in history, I'm like, I don't know, let's look that up. Science. That's my answer.
That's interesting. I really thought you would have gone for English. So that's very interesting.
Right. Over to me. That was a really good question, by the way. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I really tried to think of a question I actually want to know the answer to, and that was the one.
Oh, see, mine are a bit more...
rubbish.
No, they're not really. I guess they're not really about like your opinion on something. It's more, I don't know, philosophical almost. So, the first one is right. If you could go back in time, and you can meet yourself at 16 years old,
okay,
what's your advice? You only get a couple of minutes with them, and you want to make it, a proper advice, not something silly, like actual something you've learned since then. What's that advice?
And do you want it to be linked to the professional, or literally anything?
No, anything. It can be anything.
I would say take the plunge and take more risks early on. Because I think I've always been, you know me, I've always been someone to play it safe. You know what I mean? I went to university very close to home. I stayed at home for a year, 2 years out of 3, I stayed at home. 1 year I went and it was only half an hour from home. So it wasn't really like a big plunge. I, went into teaching, obviously a very safe profession, something that you kind of fall back into a lot of people. Yeah. I would say the old cliche that I do think is true. I've not got any regrets because I do love teaching and everything I did at the time I chose for a reason. So I'm not someone who actually has huge regrets over anything. But I would say go somewhere far away for university. It will make you grow up quicker and mature more quickly, which would have been helpful for me, I think. But also, definitely just to take more risks. And I think do things, don't feel like you have to have stuff sorted early. I was like a saver. I always wanted to save money. I always wanted to be sensible. I kind of wish that I'd just maybe took 2 years and gone off somewhere. Do you know what I mean? Even abroad or just traveling, or, money will find you again. The early 20s is the time to do that because right now I've got my lovely son. Obviously, we've got our house we've just moved into. Everything is literally perfect. I've got nothing to complain about, but I can't do that now. I can't go to Asia for 6 months. I can't go and try out this different profession because I'm too far into teaching now. So I would say experience as much as you can, as quickly as you can whilst you're young, because you've always got time to settle afterwards.
Particularly if you're in a privileged position where your life can be risk-free. Like we both lived with our parents, didn't we? And we weren't paying rent. I don't think you were anyway.
No, well, we had a nominal sum that parents asked for. I think.
So, and we were very lucky because a lot of my friends were not in that situation. They were either they've already moved out or they were paying rent and things, and they already had these responsibilities. So I agree with you. I kind of wish I'd spent more time doing some more risky things back then.
And I think that's a good point, because that advice is specifically to me, like you asked, because that's not very helpful advice to someone who, like you said, has to pay rent on their own flat. Like, brilliant. I'll go to Asia for 6 months, shall I? How? I've got no money. You is coming from a privileged position for sure.
Amazing.
Okay, so back to me then. My second question I wanted to ask you. That was a good question as well, but don't put yourself down. That was a good question. So my second question to ask you, I'm really, really interested in this because I think we've touched on this before, but I want to pin you down and try and get you on an exact number, okay? At what point in terms of money would you leave teaching and go and work in an office? And what I mean is you're quite bored, you're unfulfilled. It's not a job that you're getting a lot out of in terms of your personal gratification, but your work's finished when you leave the door. It's 9 to 5. You don't get your school holidays, but there is absolutely no stress outside of it. It's just a bit boring. What multiplier on your current wage would you have to be like, okay, I'm moving?
Oh, man. So just to put it into context, are we talking, because me and you are part-time teachers now, are we talking
I just
3 days with
I mean, solely on, imagine the amount of work you do.
The multiplier, right.
It's a multiplier, yeah. So let's say even if you go into doing 3 days in the office, like how much, or if you were a full-time teacher, you're now full-time, you end up doing probably a bit less work overall, like we've discussed, because teaching eats up lots of your spare time, but it's predictable. It's 9 to 5, it's boring, but you get it done and you leave.
This is a really, really tough one. And I think it might shock you. I don't know. Because I reckon my multiplier is honestly between 1 and 1.5.
Really?
Yeah, because I think
Has that changed? Has that changed over the years?
I think it's gone down.
Yeah.
It's gone down. As the job has become less desirable, which we've talked about in a lot of our episodes, and the pay has stagnated for such a long time, and expectation just goes up, workload goes up. I'm sort of, and we're 8 years, 9 years in now. I'm like, okay, do you know what? Especially as I'm about to have a child, and obviously you've just had your child, I think now more than ever, if someone said to me, here's an out, I know you love teaching and it's not going to be as fun every day, but you will get back 10 hours a week of your time.
Sure.
For the same pay, I'd be very tempted to take that 1-for-1 pay.
So if on that 1-for-1, then I'm just going to ask a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Do you therefore believe that your holiday time that you get as a teacher is not worth anything? Because that's essentially what we're saying if it's a 1-for-1. Are you saying that you're, not being sure how much weekend work you've got to do during term time, working after school? Would you say that's equivalent then to the payoff of holidays if you're thinking of just a straight up swap?
Yeah, when you put all of the perks versus all the perks, then not just by itself. Like the holiday's great and I would miss it. But if it was, you lose the holiday, but you gain the 10 hours a week back, that to me is like, okay, that's a pretty fair trade. And you still get to book in holiday across the year like any normal job.
Yeah, I think that's always forgotten because you think of 13 weeks a year. I was like, well, yeah, but everyone gets 5 weeks off. So it is not 13. It's still good, but it's not 13. Yeah.
And I know we always say this, I definitely do not get 13 weeks off a year. 100%. That's not what I get. In a good year, I'll have 7 weeks off. 7-8 weeks off. I'm definitely working for at least 4 weeks of those holiday weeks.
Yeah, because 7 plus 4 is 13, so that does make sense. Yeah.
Oh yeah, what am I talking about? I have no idea. Numbers, math. Maybe math isn't
I better quit for less money because I can't teach maths anymore. Maybe I shouldn't have said apart from maths.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know what my brain was thinking there, but yeah.
Okay, good answer. Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Another question for you. This it feels a bit more negative, but I don't mean it to be really.
Okay. Why are you such an idiot?
It's supposed to be more self-reflective. Yeah. Okay. It's just, what are you not very good at?
Oh, again, context here, or is this completely open?
I guess open enough. Yeah, open, because why not?
Okay.
What are you not very good at?
This is going to sound also unhinged. I think, I say I think, I am. Okay, here's the context. When I have an opinion on something, that opinion is formed, from my point of view, from me sat there thinking about it really carefully. So when I come to a conclusion about something, for example, it could be the strikes. Okay, let's talk about the strikes, for example. I really sat and thought about my opinion on everything. The pros of striking, the cons of striking. Okay, the children will miss out, but we've got to make a stand somehow. But then the media is going to be against us. Is that long-term good, or the government? Blah, blah, blah. I have that really nuanced discussion almost in my own head. Okay. Then I come to a conclusion and I form my opinion. With the strikes, my opinion was, okay, we should strike. We should absolutely strike. Now, what I'm really bad at is allowing that kind of, what I do in my own head, this debate between two sides. I'm really bad at that being shown after I've made my decision. So I don't often, I'm not very good at having that nuanced approach of like, oh, I understand where you're coming from. My reaction instead would be, oh no, I get that argument, but I've already countered that in my head, and I've decided that that's wrong, so therefore we should be striking. You're wrong.
Yeah. I guess the big flaw in that, and because I know you do that because we've known each other for a long time, but I guess the big flaw in that is assuming that your internal conversation actually does explore all of the other opinions. Like someone could still come in with an opinion you've not thought about that might change your view.
Or an opinion I've thought about, but I've just come to the wrong conclusion. Like and not even a wrong conclusion, just a different conclusion. Like, for example, again, going back to the strikes, the opinion that you absolutely do not want children to miss any school extra than they already have done because of COVID and absences being so high is a really legitimate reason, as someone who loves teaching and loves children and helping them, to not want to strike. But I know that when people said that during the whole striking thing, my thought was, no, that's wrong. No, we've got to make a stand. That's the point. Strikes are meant to be disruptive. That's the whole issue. And I was not very empathetic, I think. And I think that's where sometimes I can come across like, I think I lack empathy sometimes, because I feel like I've already made that decision based on empirical evidence, and it's not my opinion. This is based on fact. And I'm just wrong, most of the time with that.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Well, thank you for the insight into your brain.
That's fine. You're so welcome. Let's move on now, because when we do this in the future, we might do some kind of sporadic Q&A. So we can't have our own ones there as our special first bite-sized episode. But we did ask on Instagram for some questions to be put forward to us. I've done it a few times, and I've actually kept a whole bunch of them as we've been going. I'm going to build a bank up, and lots of people have asked us lots of questions, which is really, really helpful for us, because it just gives us something to go off, basically. So for the last half of this bite-sized episode, I just thought we'd go through some of those, Hayden. So question from our listeners. I'm not going to name the listeners. I think in the future I'll ask whether you want to be anonymous or not, but I know that some of these questions might lend themselves to being anonymous. So first question to you, Hayden. How important do you think displays are in the primary classroom? And the context here is from this person that they personally have not changed their displays in over 3 years in their classroom, and they do not feel like it has remotely impacted anything with their learning. But there's a culture amongst some of their colleagues that that's a bad thing, that she's not done that changing for that long.
Sure. My opinion's changed on this a couple of times in my career, and probably come to a slight middle ground recently, actually. So if you asked me this any time before now, I almost definitely would have said, yeah, I agree. Display is a complete waste of time. Then it kind of transformed a little bit to, actually, do you know what? I've seen people use displays really effectively. So maybe it's not a complete waste of time. It's just a tool. So most of my narrative has been, it's just a tool. It's a tool. If you use it, it can be really good. If you don't want to use it, though, then there's no point in it being there. It's going to do nothing. But I guess I've changed my opinion just ever so slightly, in that I do think there is a slight middle ground between it being a tool and actually they are just useful, in that working walls in particular, I think it is objectively better. Honestly.
So what is a working wall? Just to clarify, anyone listening who doesn't know what you're talking about.
So a working wall, so if you think of a traditional display in a classroom, it might be that the teachers printed off some posters and things and put them up, or made like a really nice display of, I don't know, showing their current topic or whatever. But a working wall is a bit more, the idea is you can change it all the time. Like, it's easy to change. Like, it might just be a massive bit of paper on your wall and you rip it off and then you put another one up there and you write what you're currently doing. And particularly in maths, I think to myself, that would have been better that last week if I'd had a working wall up on the wall, because my kids would have benefited from seeing a summary of like the 3 things we've been learning this week, because I've asked them to put it all together today, and it's not on my main board where I'm teaching, because I'm teaching stuff. It would have been really useful for it to be over there. And because I didn't do it, because I'm like, displays are useless, I think they would have had a better, genuinely, I think it would have been better in any situation to have that on the wall over there for that particular lesson. So it is a tool. And sometimes if you don't use that tool, I think it is just worse.
Yeah, and I guess you could expand that to most stuff, couldn't you? Because where does it end? Because there's always going to be something that could be better. And I know on this week's longer podcast we spoke about this. This attitude of, well, of course you can sit there and go, everything can always be better, but you just has to be a cutoff point. And I think demonizing teachers for not using displays in a way that you do is not a useful thing to do. And even though you can justify it, like you just said, that objectively, putting some of the work up and doing it live for the children and them having something to refer to is objectively good in many cases. Is it worth demonizing staff or getting them down because they chose not to do that? I would argue no.
No, and also just to come in straight against myself almost immediately is that you can still just do those things in different ways anyway. It doesn't need to be a display though. What I just said about a working wall could just be something written on my whiteboard that I'm not using for the rest of the week. Okay, there it is on there. It could just be a little sheet that they get in their book, and they stick it in the back, and they refer back to that. And I make one of them every topic. Like, it doesn't have to be a display. I just think there are some situations where display is like the easiest option, and I probably could have just used that. It would have taken me 2 minutes to update that working wall over there, and instead I've given them nothing. Okay, so I've got a question as well. This one is really interesting. What is your worst day of teaching ever? And also, I guess this person felt bad. What's the best day? So best day.
Always good to have balance. Thank you very much. Yeah. My worst day of teaching, the one immediately comes to mind. I'm sure if I sit there and think that I might be able to think of a different one, but one immediately comes to my mind, and it was, and I think people might be nodding here if they've been in the class before.
The day we met.
I was so scared, Aidan, of you. No, the worst I've ever had was when I was a year 4 teacher. And I think I was 2 years into the job, 2 or 3 years into the job. And it was DT day. And it was the worst day ever because DT, design and technology, we were building, they'd already designed these lamps. So we were doing electricity in science. And we'd, interwoven some DT for DT day. And the children had designed this lamp. And all it had to do was have a switch, a battery, and a light somewhere in it. And they could do whatever they wanted. And there were some really amazing ideas from the children. But the reason it was the worst day ever is because none of the batteries worked. And I had children crying. They, half the class struggled to make, they have really over-the-top ideas. Yeah, I'm going to make a whale, and the blowhole is going to be a light, and it's going to be awesome. It's like, okay, let's temper our expectations here. I don't think that's going to quite work. So half the class were upset because it looked rubbish, because a 7-year-old had made it. And obviously it's not very good. The other half of the class who had managed to get what they wanted to, have look at the way they wanted it to look, were also crying because none of the batteries worked and the lights weren't turning on whatsoever. Half the children didn't finish. We finished that day. It was the end of DT day. We didn't have any more time to do it. So they took it all home. None of it worked. And I was incredibly stressed because I had no other adults in the room. Children were upset. They'd left home and I had to tidy up for an hour and a half after school, knowing that it had been a complete failure. So that was stressful.
There's no worse feeling, is there, than feeling like you've let the kids down. It is a horrible, horrible feeling. I know what you mean. I can't really think of a worse day, Like, I can't think of one particular day. I think it will be an observation day. I know that they always stress me out the most, like back in the early days of the career. Like,
have you ever received observation feedback? Do you know in the old days when it was graded? Very rare now, but when it was graded back in the old days, where you were graded as like either requires improvement or bad. Have you ever had
that? No, luckily. I've had, but equally on the other flip side, I never really got any that were like outstanding. I was always just kind of middly, which annoyed me because I'd put so much work into it and I was really trying to get like that top grade, and I never did, and it was just annoying me.
Do you think that was, I'm kind of going off piece here, but do you think that is a good or a bad thing that you put so much effort into those observations?
I think it's a good thing. I know it sounds mad because I often say like how stressful it is and we shouldn't be, but it did when I used to write down my lesson plans like every day for all my lessons. Like that first year of teaching, I used to do that. And I'd properly write down my observation plans, like really, really detailed, like every bit of thinking that went into that lesson. It did kind of just make a lot of those things become automatic, which I am quite grateful for looking back on. But I don't know if that was necessary. I think I attribute some of my skills to that time. So I don't know.
Okay, so yeah, it's interesting. I'd say only thing I'd say to that is there's probably a difference there between experienced staff and newer staff. I'm not sure that experienced staff need to have that pressure on them when it comes to observations. I think observations in general need to just be, a professional conversation rather than almost like an interview process with people you've already hired that you're making feel bad.
Yeah, it's funny because I'd say the point of the observation didn't really help me at all. But because it made me like write down all my ideas and how I'm going to teach this lesson, I think that made me a better teacher, that part of it, that process, which you didn't need to do. I just did that because I thought that was the right thing to do. The feedback and the doing the lesson, I don't really get anything from any of them.
So I guess I'm going to flip the question back to you for the second part then. Okay. Do you have a best day?
A best day? Do you know what? I don't know if it is the best day, but it's the first one that came to my mind, okay? And it sounds awful the way I'm going to pitch this. It was during COVID. And I know that sounds terrible because obviously that was a bad time, but I did have one of my most enjoyable days at school. And there's two, and I'm not going to mention the one that you might be thinking of because we've mentioned it before on the podcast about the PE day we had. But it was a snow day, and which we don't get that often, really. Like, they are quite a privilege. And we just went outside at lunchtime, and there must have been like 20 kids in. It was a key worker kids day. And a couple of staff go in, and I was one of the staff for that day. And we went outside, and we were making snow angels, and we had a little snow fight. And it was it was pure joy. Like, everyone was so happy, and I just really loved that moment of just looking around and being like, everyone is so happy. We're in a really miserable time right now, and everyone was feeling a bit anxious this morning. But right now, we're having the best time, and I don't know. That's just a nice memory that stuck with me.
Yeah. I would say anytime I think of a best day, I'm not thinking of a really good maths lesson. I'm thinking of a day where children were extremely happy. And that could be trips, that could be individual moments where you've helped a child out personally. Like those days where you feel you had a breakthrough with the child, like they were really struggling about something and they overcame it, or they were anxious and you helped them. The best days as a teacher are always when there's something personal with the children and they feel good about themselves. And I think that's what keeps us coming back to this profession. I think that's what's stopping a lot of people from jumping ship and leaving, because a lot of people are leaving, but the only reason a lot more aren't is that kind of, that joy when you manage to just spark something in the children. That they're the best days for me, for sure.
That's what I'd miss if we did the whole one, if I went a 1 times multiplier to another job.
I see.
That's what I'd miss. I think that might be the thing that makes me regret that choice if I did take a job for the same pay that's not teaching. I'll be like, I do really actually miss those experiences with the kids.
Yeah, because you will struggle to get that in an office. Like if you're doing a job where you are just ticking boxes and doing admin and stuff like that, you wouldn't get that. All right then, so Hayden, we're going to call that a day. We want this to be a short one. I know we're like we're talking for another hour, and suddenly a bite size will become an hour, and the real ones will become 2.
I know what we're like. We'll use up all our ideas. We think of stuff, and we're like, yeah, these are good. And we do all the ideas in one, and then next episode we're like, we kind of did everything. So let's call it there, shall we?
Okay, guys, let us know, please, what you think about this short form content. It won't always be a Q&A. It might just be something we want to talk about just very, very briefly. You might have forgotten something from the long form one. Do you prefer it? Do you like it? How do you listen? Get in touch all the usual ways. Find us on Instagram is the best way, at Teach Sleep Repeat Podcast. Thank you for listening. And Hayden, any parting words before we go?
My parting words are, have a great day. Goodbye.
Bye.